Welcome back to the Rob Skinner podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Today I'm thrilled to have Will Archer on the program. Will is a missionary and church leader in the Potomac Valley Church right near Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. He's been a missionary to Jamaica. He's married to his wife, Tasha. And Will is really at the center of the conversation dealing with racial issues in America and in the church. And the thing that inspires me about Will is he's a powerful church leader and literally has traveled around the world to learn how to be a better church leader. He's got a cutting edge ministry there in Northern Virginia, and I'm looking forward to finding out more about what he's doing there. But before we get into the program, I'd like to let you know about a mission planting happening in the summer of 2021. We're planting a church in Flagstaff, Arizona. And Pam and I are looking for people interested in leading that team as well as joining that team as members. So if you're interested, you can email me at rob@tucsonchurchofchrist.org. Back to the program. Hey, Will, thanks for joining the program.
Yeah, grateful to be here with you. That's so cool about Flagstaff.
I know. I'm just so excited about it. It's something that the Phoenix Church talked to me about and asked me if I could kind of spearhead getting a church going again. There's actually a small house church there of about 12, and the church has been there for probably 20 years, but it's languished, and it's gone up to close to 50, and yet has diminished. And so trying to get a second wave or a surge mission planting to get it over 50 and then 100. And it's such a beautiful area. It's a couple hours away from the Grand Canyon, close to Sedona. It doesn't look like Arizona as you'd imagine. It's beautiful trees, gorgeous country, more like Colorado than the desert of Arizona. But
wow.
Well, Will, thanks again for joining me on the program. And I wanted to start off by asking, how did you become a Christian?
Yeah, so I'm grateful to be with you here. My story becoming a Christian, like all of our stories, is deeply personal, and just really testifies just to the greatness of God. My dad was a Seventh-day Adventist minister that went to graduate school at Northwestern, and while he was there, he converted to Islam. And so my family is very invested in the Seventh-day Adventist Church and in Christian communities in Jamaica. But I grew up Sunni Muslim. I went with my dad when I was 8 to Mecca and to Medina. And while I was there, I was just blown away by the thousands of worshipers who were circumnavigating the Kaaba. And it began a lot of questions for me as a young boy about faith. When I was 12 years old, I read the Bible for the first time and I was blown away by Jesus. And I knew that I wanted to follow Jesus that I saw in the Bible, but I really had a hard time finding that Jesus, really, his faith lived out in churches. And so I spent the next 6 years going to lots of different churches, asking lots of questions. And then when I was 18 years old, I took a door-to-door sales job, and I was knocking on doors in the Bronx, New York. I was there for college, and as I knocked on a door, they were having a Bible talk, and I literally walked into a Bible talk, and just totally God. And it was a married Bible talk, really great people, good food, great people, and I studied the Bible, and I stopped, and then later that summer, that was in the spring, later that summer, I studied the Bible and I got baptized in New York, August 22nd, 1993.
Well, that's an amazing story. You're like the merchant looking for fine pearls, or actually the one just stumbling across it, not really looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So you grew up in a background where, okay, your dad was Seventh-day Adventist, then converted to Islam.
Mm-hmm.
But he allowed you to go visit other Christian churches.
Actually, my father passed away from prostate cancer when I was 9. But had he lived, he absolutely would have done that. I mean, he taught me from a very young age that I should always have my own opinions, question things, search things out. That was very much a big part of his his commitment to me was that I needed to have my own views on things. So I don't doubt that he would have encouraged me to explore um, wherever I wanted to explore. But honestly, my fidelity to my father might have been the thing that may have held me back from doing that. My father's by far the my biggest hero and kind of the greatest influence in my life, um, other than Christ. And so I probably would not have done that had my father not passed away. But
Mm.
after my dad died, I remained faithful to my Muslim faith. I prayed 5 times a day, as I had done when he was alive. But what turned um, my thinking, honestly, wasn't church. It was just the scriptures. And it was Jesus.
Mm.
I've just been completely blown away just by how he is and how what he calls us to be, and that's kind of been my pursuit since I was 12.
Wow. Now, prior to the recording, we talked a little bit about your background. Your
Mhm.
dad's from Jamaica. Can you share a little bit about your background and your family?
Yeah. So my when my dad came came to the U.S., he met my mom. My mom is second generation American from Poland. So my great grandfather fought in World War One. My grandfather in World War Two, and my mom's family settled in the Chicago area. So I have a whole lot of Polish siblings, and I know a lot of Polish jokes, which are usually not great, and lots of love for Polish food. And then my dad, he's Afro Caribbean. We also have some Indian on my grandmother's side, and so I'm the only child of my that my parents had. Unfortunately, their marriage only lasted 7 years,
Mm.
um, and then they got divorced. My mom remarried, and I have two younger siblings who are both mixed, and then two other younger siblings who are both white. So our family is, we're black, we're white, we're mixed, we're all of that. And
That's amazing.
so, and I identify with Eastern Europeans, and with Europeans, I identify with Africans and Afro Caribbeans. I identify with my Indian heritage as well, not American Indian, but
Right. Eastern
Indian from
Indian.
India.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so yeah. But I'm a disciple of Jesus who sees everyone as my family,
That's
because
amazing.
literally that's my family.
It must be amazing when you get together with your family for get-togethers and maybe friends or people that don't know you too well, trying to piece you all together and wonder how you're connected.
Oh yeah, it was so funny. When I first came here to Potomac Valley, a couple weeks in, my brother came to visit church, and it was, I'd shared about my family, but my brother and I, we look a lot alike. Only if you can picture me blonde and white, you know, because my mom's genes are really strong, and so people just kept having double takes, like, no, no, that's not right, and it just is, So, so I do genuinely know that race is a construct, because
Mm,
it's just a construct.
yeah. Wow, that's really fascinating. Now, can you tell me about your journey? So you became a Christian in New York City.
Mhm,
I mean, total melting pot, people from all over the place.
mhm.
How'd you get to Potomac Valley? Where have you been? Tell me just briefly about your ministry career up until now.
Sure. So I got converted in '93, and had the opportunity to intern with the New York Church in '94, which didn't go well. I didn't do very well in that internship, um, and but I was really grateful for the opportunity. And then I lived in New York, worked, like many brothers and sisters do, served in lots of ministries, mostly with the teens and with the singles and with campus. And then I moved to Atlanta, because the guy that studied the Bible with me, Frank Davis, he had moved to Atlanta to lead one of the regions there, and so I moved to Atlanta just to learn from him. And I moved there in '96, December of '96, and then in January 1st, 1998, about a year or so later, I had the opportunity to go into the ministry. Both Pasha and I, as singles, we served there in the ministry, leading different ministries in the Atlanta church until about December of 2004. and then we moved to Macon to lead the church there. We were there in Macon for about 2 years, and then we moved to Philly to lead the teens in Philly. And then we were there for about 3 years, and then we moved from Philly to the Bahamas, and we led the church there for 4 years, and then moved back after we raised up local leaders, and we moved back to the U.S. and led the campus ministry at UGA, and that's where our paths kind of connected
That's
with
right.
when he was at UGA. And so led the campus ministry there for about a year and a half, and then just a little under 7 years ago, we moved up here to Virginia to lead the Potomac Valley Church. So we've been in lots of different places, 7 churches in
Wow.
27 years.
So New York City, Atlanta, Macon,
Mm-hmm.
then to Jamaica. Did I miss that?
The Bahamas, actually.
Oh, the Bahamas. Sorry.
Yeah, so my family's Jamaican,
Okay.
but we led the church in the Bahamas.
Okay.
And but Jamaica's home for me. So
Mm-hmm.
so you can't say Jamaica enough.
So the Bahamas, then back directly to Athens.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've been in Potomac Valley, what, 4, 5, 6 years?
6 years now. So that we're going into the seventh year of being here.
Okay.
So interestingly enough, we moved here in August.
Okay. Now there's another person from New York City I talked to who was converted, or at least was around during the early 90s. His name's Angel Martinez. Do you know
Mhm.
Angel?
Very well. Yeah.
Okay.
Angel's a great friend.
So did you guys know each other back in New York City, back in those early days?
I knew about Angel going to DR in Puerto Rico back then. So he was like a great hero that I just heard about.
I see.
Back when I was in New York, but we got to be really good friends while I was in Atlanta and then beyond that. So we've been friends for a long time. And then when we were in the Bahamas, we were part of a discipleship group together. And they just came and spent but maybe about a year now. They came with their son and were able to spend the night at our house. We love them. They are Angel and Lutz are amazing people and incredible church builders.
Amazing job. So inspiring to talk to them and get to know them. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, you've been there for 6 years. Can you just give me a rundown? Give me the nuts and bolts. What kind of growth have you seen in the church in the Potomac Valley? Because I've heard nothing but good things. Why don't we just start right there? What kind of progress have you seen in terms of growth in the church?
Yeah, so Potomac Valley was a region of the Northern Virginia Church until 13 years ago, when Potomac Valley became a cooperative congregation. And for the first 7 years, incredible hard work and energy was put into building the group. But there was a lot of hurt from the past. This is a transient place, so there are lots of people from lots of different places, lots of hurt from the past. In our family of churches. And then also a lot of racial and political tension that was present in the church. The church, as I mentioned, got started in 2007. The election in 2008 really hit some pretty major fault lines within the congregation. And there were some cliques and some hurt feelings and mistrust that was formed from that time. As a result, the group, in the first 7 years, it grew and then it shrank. And in effect, we only grew by 3 people. So we went from 132 to 135 in 7 years, and a lot of mistrust. Mm-hmm. And so when we came in, our approach was what we had learned from a number of different engagements in the ministry and from talking with different leaders and just from praying and study, was just to listen. So we spent the first 4 months just listening. We went to every family group, met with everyone, talked it through. The next 8 months, we did deep teaching. And then a full year into being here, we devote ourselves to fasting for the next 4 months. A day in September, 3 days in October, 7 days that November, congregational fasting, and then 21 days that January. And we asked Ed Anton to come in and call us to repentance and teach us about repentance. And we took a full month to really look at what does repentance look like. From that point forward, God has just done miracles as we've set our hearts on really repenting and mending our relationships and forgiving and taking responsibility for the hurt that we've done to each other, or that we've perceived that others, may have done to us. Um, it's we're just a group of messed up people, and we state that all the time. Um, that group that was 135 is now 250 disciples, which
Wow.
is just God.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and what's even more inspiring is the the reach in the community is just grown tenfold. And um, and when you add in our children and the people that regularly attend our services, or really are connected with us, we're a group of about 500, in terms of just kind of our community reach. But that was born out of truly a commitment to repentance and just the grace of God,
Mm,
because there wasn't any more effort that was put forward in the past 6 years as had been put forward in the prior seven.
mm,
The ministers, the leaders, the same amount of energy, but it really is a testament to what happens when we repent,
mm,
and when we together we decide we're going to do this,
mm.
as opposed to just a few people doing all the work.
Right.
So that's it's been God, and
Wow.
just blow complete blow away.
That's amazing. That's inspiring, especially when a church has been struggling for a long time or plateaued out. To see it growing again is difficult at, at the
Mhm.
minimum, but in a lot of situations, it's just so overwhelmingly challenging that people kind of give up. Just
Yeah.
it never happens. So congratulations to you for seeing that grow, and I know you give the glory to God through repentance. But can you share a little bit about the demographics of the church you lead? I know that the church in DC used to be part of the church that Russ Yule founded way back in the day,
Mhm.
probably '93, I'm gonna guess, when he first started it. But then
Mhm.
it broke up into different regions. You've got different churches all over the DC and Maryland area and Northern
Mhm.
Virginia. What's your racial demographic in your church, life stage? I mean, roughly campus, singles, marrieds. How are you composed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's another interesting thing. I think there is a perception that's often not stated, but definitely is felt, that that the leader of the congregation, whatever kind of racial background or kind of elk that they are, that's what gets produced in the church.
Right.
Um, and we really had a commitment that we wanted to ensure that in all that we're doing, that we weren't using a humanistic lens in terms of how we think about church growth and
Right.
and what we do. And so here's what's interesting: the group that's probably grown the most in our congregation has been the number of white members. So we've probably grown more in the number of white members than any other group,
Mm.
in any other demographic group. That being said, we're probably sitting somewhere around, um, maybe about 30 to 40% African American, maybe about 30%, maybe 40% white, and then we have an amazing contingent of Latinos, of Indians, mostly West Indians, um, and Asians, growing group of Asians from a number of different places, but mostly from Filipinos and Vietnamese. Um, and so we're completely a diverse group with a diverse leadership group as well. We have one elder who's white, one elder who's black. Um, our, our our ministry staff is very diverse as well, but also the family group leaders that we have are a very diverse group, and it's reflective of our community. I think I will say this, and you know this from living in lots of places and working with lots of groups. I think it's important that churches reflect the communities that they live in. So if
Right.
you live in a community that's predominantly white, it would make sense that your church would be predominantly white,
Hmm.
or predominantly black, or predominantly Latino. But our area, like where I live, we live in the second largest jurisdiction in Virginia. It's the first majority minority community. It is a very diverse community. And so our congregation reflects our community. Um, and I think that's also what's God's used to really make it very welcoming to lots of different types of people is our commitment to being diverse, and our embrace of, definitely racial diversity, but also economic diversity, um, and also political diversity. So we're very
Mhm.
politically diverse, which is really important
now
in
that
our area.
now you're talking, now you're talking miracles. Well,
Yeah, bro, it is miraculous to see it, and it creates lots of tension points,
boy.
and lots of strong opinions. But I've been really proud of the Christians. They really have embraced being ambassadors, and we have a number of good friends of mine who are both Democratic and Republican politicians that are active parts of our family groups, and interact in a very healthy way with each other. They differ a lot, but they actually um, treat each other with a lot of respect.
Okay, so you're in a very racially diverse area, which is awesome. And what about life stage? Campus, singles, marrieds? Like how's that
Yeah.
broken down?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Great question. Sorry, I meant to answer. So I would say, our group has really changed a lot over the course of the past 6 years. When we got here, it was primarily, marrieds, um, in their 40s.
Mhm.
That was primarily this core of our church. We're 20 minutes, 20 miles, if you will, from Washington D.C. So a lot of this, we're basically like D.C. suburbs, if you
Right.
will, in Northern Virginia. Now the group has really changed a lot. We have a growing group of young professionals. We have a very small but vibrant campus ministry. Um, only about eight or 10 students there, but the majority of our group are young professionals. Our group of 40 and 50-year-old marrieds, we're holding it down, and we've got a growing group of seniors. We call them our cornerstones. And then with all these 30 to 40-year-old marrieds, we have lots of little kids now and lots of teens and preteens. But the group that's the smallest is our campus. We only have one small campus that's in our area, the University of Mary Washington, and then a community college, Northern Virginia Community College. So our ministry strategy is very different than a lot of the churches in our families of churches that are centered around campus ministry. Our ministry strategy really has a lot to do with community engagement and involvement, and also just kind of care for our professionals.
Okay, that's where I want to jump off because I knew that just based on the geography that your area is like a bedroom community for the DC area. So I'm sure that a lot of the married couples are driving into the DC area for work and then coming back at night. So that makes sense. And I also heard that your church didn't have a real large campus nearby, but you've really focused a lot on the singles ministry. And
We have.
um, that's what I'm very interested in as a church leader. Our singles ministry has definitely gone through the struggles. We had relatively stronger campus ministry, but the singles ministry, a lot of times people move out, they go on to larger cities, they go to Phoenix or California. What have you done to reach singles and reach Generation Z?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say, we're in the middle of it. And so our singles can tell you we've made tons of mistakes, and we're not getting it right on so many fronts. So we're working on it, but we're constantly keeping an open door to have lots of conversations. The things that I think God has definitely done to really move in a great way, that I think has really helped us with our singles, is one is we really decided to invest in them, and give them a high profile and give them responsibility. So we invested in singles ministry activities, singles events, singles leaders. So investment in singles has been big. The other thing is, there's a shift that's happening that I know you're very acutely aware of. We're in the 41-year marker in our family of churches, and so you have so many of these singles were kids that grew up in our church. And so there's a very different culture if you've grown up in our church. And there was a clear plan for like children's ministry and teen ministry and campus ministry. Singles is kind of like this big drop off.
Right.
And, great work has been done by the single service team to do like big events. But in terms of like a real strategic plan for them, there really hasn't been in most churches. So that's where we saw an opportunity. We're like, all right, we don't have a big campus. Let's really invest in um, doing what we do well. Like we can bring people over and have food, and we can uh, offer hospitality. We can help young professionals with their, professional development, and with their life stage, and help them to acclimate. Because a lot of them, particularly the kids that have grown up in our churches, you know, they've had challenges in campus,
Mm.
but there is nothing like when you start your first job, and after 5 days of work, everybody's going to happy hour, and there is a whole lot of darkness that you can get pulled into.
Right.
Your boss is using profanity to describe things, you know and that you need to do.
Hmm.
And so how do you make sense of that if you've grown up in our kind of family of churches? All of those things are skills that other professionals can pass on. And so our group that was in our 40s, we said we've got to really invest in loving these young people. Once you create a space where people are cared for, honestly, things grow. It's an interesting thing. Not all growth is healthy, but healthy bodies grow. So if people know, hey, you love me, you care about me, you're going to help me figure out how to make sense of how to function in life, uh, people are drawn to that. And so there's no logic to coming to Potomac Valley. I mean, it is a bedroom community. I think it's beautiful. I think it's amazing, but it doesn't have any of the draws of so many places. There's no beach. There's no mountains. There's just a lot of roads, and houses. Um, so there's nothing we've got, but love we have in abundance, and we have love and homes and food.
That's
And so,
awesome.
so I think that's been our strategy, just loving people.
Well, that's super encouraging because, when I hear about that, I go, okay, I could do that.
Yeah.
I could do that right here in Tucson and encourage it, and just makes me think, just family oriented, food oriented events, teaching on just how to make it in the professional world. That's very helpful. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
One of the things that really has inspired me, Will, about you is you've got a strong connection with the churches in Indonesia, with
Mhm.
Harlem and Vanya, Salim, and I've seen you over there before at different conferences, and I know you've gone over there with your whole staff. How have you? I mean, that's literally on the opposite end of the world. I mean, it's like we're talking around, can't get much farther away than Indonesia. How have you imported ministry ideas from that country into your own church? And tell me a little bit about the development of how you even got connected there.
Yeah. So with the Salims and with the churches in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, about 12 years ago, we were in Philly working with the teens, and I got asked to go lead Hope Youth Corps, because Tasha just had our youngest journey. And I went over there and I saw something I just had not seen before. I mean, just the level of integration that Indonesian churches and now the Southeast Asian churches have in terms of engaging in the community, really raising up leaders at an exponential rate, but doing it without cranking,
Mm-hmm.
just building community, loving people, making it relational and not transactional. I was just blown away by what I saw. And I came back home and I said, Tasha, we have to learn from these people. Like, they're doing something no one else is doing.
Yeah.
And it's not supposed to grow there. Like, I mean, it is the country with the largest Muslim population. Why is this Christian church doing so well in soil that we might think might be too difficult for it to happen? And so since 2008, I've been going there on a steady basis. Since we've been here in Potomac Valley, that was actually one of the things we talked about when we were offered the position. We said, are you guys willing to make a commitment that we'll go to Indonesia every year for 10 years? Because we have to learn. Like, we don't know how to do it, you don't know how to do it, let's go find out from people that do.
Mm.
And the board was like, if you can raise the money, sure.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, we'll do it. And since then we've had sometimes six. We've had as many as 20 people that have gone over in a year. Some of them are ministry staff, some of them are core leaders, some of them are just interested Christians. And I think what's helped us to make the connection is that we have just communicated very honestly to the church that nobody knows how to do this in the 21st century. We know the principles that Jesus has given us, but and those are immovable.
Mm.
The truths are immovable, but we have to be flexible as it relates to methods. So let's learn. And it was a very difficult thing for us to learn, honestly, as Americans, because we are the ones that we go and
Hmm.
we teach.
Right.
And honestly, and you know this from traveling around the world, people are used to Americans or Westerners being the teachers.
Right.
But we said, no, 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 we're not the teachers.
Mm.
we I mean, we'll teach a class if you want us to, but we're not the teachers. We're going to be students.
Mm.
Because and this is just my own personal opinion, when I look at global demographics that are being projected out, I think America very well could look a lot more like Indonesia than less like Indonesia 10, 20, and 30 years from now. So as an evangelist, I'm thinking, how do I evangelize the world of 30 years from now?
Mm.
I have to start today
Mm.
and figure out, okay, what does it mean to really reach people that do not believe in Christian values? How do I reach people that are agnostic or atheist or Muslim or you name the religion? How do I reach people that may be antagonistic towards us? How can I connect with them? And with the Indonesians, I think the thing that we've got over and over again is you build deep relationships and you actually show people who Jesus is by what you do. So we made a commitment that would change the way we did ministry. Like we were very invested in serving the community. I have deep relationships with local, um, you know, human service organizations, local politicians. We know each other. We eat together. I get
Mm.
to know them,
Hmm.
um, and because and in everything I'm doing, I want them to see Jesus. I have no problem. I always say Jesus, but I want to make sure they're seeing Jesus.
Right.
And it's been crazy to see how they've responded. Um, but we learned all that from the Indonesians. I mean, they do stuff, and you know this, Rob. It's mind boggling. You're like,
Yeah.
how is this guy? How is this lady a Christian? And it's just deep relationships. Long time or short, Agrippa can be persuaded.
Yeah.
You just got to be willing to invest for the long game.
Okay. Well, let's just jump off right there because I think there's quite a bit to talk about. I mean, one thing, you know, it's okay. Well, before we get into that, let me just ask you this: what specifically can you point to one thing where you go, "This is something we've adopted from Indonesia, and this is what we're doing right now in the ministry"? That's like a direct adaptation or modification of something we learned in Indonesia.
Absolutely. One specific thing is community engagement. So we made a decision that we would do this thing called the Great Banquet, um, where we barbecue 1,000 pounds of meat, and we give out clothing and food to families in Title I schools and to anyone that wants it. Here's the direct connect between that and Indonesia. What we realize is you can have events that are charity based events that are transactional. So you do them so that they will drum up the numbers of people that visit, the numbers of Bible studies. But what we learned is you shouldn't do that. Just make it relational. Do something that you get nothing out of, that you only give, and tell the Christians just to do that. It is the most amazing thing. People are able, because people are smart. They can't always articulate things, but people are really smart. They can sense when what you're doing is transactional or when what you're doing is relational. And I cannot point to any growth that's directly come through years of doing that kind of work. But what I can tell you is that over the past year in particular, we've had a number of prominent people in the community that have called me and Tasha and said, I want to go to a church that I know really cares about people. Can I join Potomac Valley Church and start attending. I'm not ready to study the Bible,
Mm.
but I just want to come be with at church with you. So those are the people that I met in Indonesia 12 years ago that I've had relationships with. That is Kiki. That is,
Mhm.
you know, that is, so many guys I could name, and ladies I could name. Those people are won over. Prominent people are won over by the body of what you do,
Right.
and they study you for a long time.
Mm.
And we're starting to see the beginnings of those people that are reaching out. So I think that's what the Indonesians taught us is make it relational, love people,
Mm.
and then do things that you get nothing from.
Mm.
And we're like, okay.
Okay, so as we talk a little bit about Indonesia, okay, I find this is what's so interesting is that you're right. Like, as an American, I go, I'm a missionary, I'm a goer, I'm
Hmm.
a I'm a giver, I'm a teacher,
Hmm.
and yet what I see in you is you've been humble enough to actually go out to the mission field, to one of the brightest spots in our kingdom today, a place where churches and disciples are multiplying and amazing things are happening. People of influence are being converted in great numbers. It is very miraculous to see it happening. And yet, part of me is like, in my pride as an American, I go, hey, that's a third world country. That's that's a mission location, a target, not really a place to learn from. And how did you just kind of develop the humility to go, okay, we're going to reverse this process and actually learn from these people?
Yeah, there are a lot of things to that, and we can have a much longer
Right.
conversation if you'd like. I'll tell you a couple of things. So, a part of it is born out of my own experience. So, when my dad was in university, and he met a number of friends that were Muslim, his passion for his life was education, and there was a commitment that his friends from college had to help him to be successful with educating Jamaicans. And I saw growing up, these Saudi royals that would come to our school and would invest hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and they've been doing it all over the world, and for a long time. Uh, and and honestly, that picture helped me to understand that there is an intentionality that the Muslim world has about spreading the message.
Mm.
When you look at corporations here in the U.S., I mean, there's an intentionality that these corporations have to spread their message. There's an intentionality that the Chinese government or the Russian government or whatever government has about spreading their message. Um, and the truth is, there are a lot more people. There are a lot of folks that are much more efficient and effective at spreading the message than we have been as Christians. And so when I saw the working model in Indonesia, I said, this is where they're doing something here.
Mm.
But also the world I live in is changing. It's changing radically. So I've got to figure out how to change with it
Mm.
and learn from whoever's doing it.
Mm.
40 years ago, I would have gone to Boston. And
Right.
that's no aspersions on Boston
Right.
today. I'm just saying 40 years ago, I would have gone to Boston.
Right.
Today, I'll go to Jakarta.
Right.
10 years from now, I might be going to Estonia. Like, I mean, I have no idea.
Right.
It is neutral where the place is.
Hmm.
Where I think as Christians and as Christian leaders, we have to make a shift is recognizing that the Spirit of God works, and we have to follow the Spirit
Mm.
and not kind of hold on to our own kind of entrenched viewpoints. And you are right; it is very, very difficult for us as Americans to do this, and
Hmm.
it honestly has been very difficult for our church to embrace the idea that we're learning from Asians.
Right.
And there's so many folks that have felt like, oh well, it works there, but it doesn't work here. And that's a part of what has me so excited about what we're seeing now is we're actually seeing really the first signs of leaves coming up, out of the ground from what we've learned there. And there were so many times, Rob, I would be on these long flights thinking, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. Like, why am I doing this? Like, you know, I don't speak Bahasa. Like, I don't have any connection. Like, why am I here? But I would get there and I was like, okay, because I gotta learn. I gotta learn from Mr.
Mm,
Ludiman how to serve, with no end in mind.
mm,
I've got to learn from Kiki how to think about reaching professionals. I've got to learn, you know, from, you know, from a number of folks. I'm trying to
gosh.
be careful not to name people for different
Sure,
reasons.
sure.
Um, but I've got to learn from these folks, and we're starting to see it, and it is crazy to me, to be honest. We got a phone call from a good friend of ours who's a Democratic elected official, that said, "Hey, I really want to be a part of the Potomac Valley Church."
Mm.
And then this week we got another phone call from a Republican official that says, "I really," and I'm like, "Okay, these people don't belong together. They
That's
fight
right.
each other."
That's
But
right.
they're like, "This is neutral ground
Mm,
where I can come and I can actually just go to church."
right.
And again, we don't have it figured out. Please, I'm not saying that
No.
we're doing anything other than a desperate commitment to, following the Spirit. But I will say, I think the choices that I've made are not divorced from a connection to my own experience,
Hmm.
because I am paying attention, at least, to the fact that there are non-Christian organizations that are deeply committed to influencing the direction of the world. And I think it's important for Christians to be engaged and to recognize, and I believe that the message of Jesus is the only message that unites all people.
Right.
And so how do we get that out,
Mm.
and how do we represent that in a way that is credible and sustainable? And so that's really what drew me there.
What inspires me about it, it reminds me of 1 Corinthians 9 when Paul talks about being all things to all men and running to win, not just running the race, but running to win. And the thing that I respect about what you've done there is flexibility, adaptability, plastic thinking, being able to be moldable into your 40s, that just deciding, hey, I'm going to learn from anybody in order to advance the gospel. And I love that. I mean, that inspires me. That gets my blood pumping. I just go, yes, that's one of the reasons why I want to start this podcast is I want to find out who's growing and I want to learn from those people. I mean, first and foremost, I just want to learn for myself for the benefit of our church here and the
Mhm.
churches I lead. But I love what you're doing there, Will. It's so inspiring and very unique. I don't know of any other church that has that kind of commitment to learning from a place that's so difficult and expensive to get to. But
Yeah.
do you mind if we just shift the conversation? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
You've been outspoken on the racial tension in the US and we're still going through it. I mean, it hasn't passed over. There's riots throughout the country. Um, every few days there's, something having to do with police and just all sorts of stuff. Can you summarize your views? I know this is a big ask. Can you summarize your views on what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for asking that question. I think it's a very relevant one, and it's connected to what we've been talking about. You know, I do believe that the message of Jesus is the solution, and that Jesus' message is for all people. We have, um, a history that is very painful, um, and real, and I think it's important to be real about that history. Um, and we do have issues with violence and with police brutality, and I am good friends with the former chief of police here, and with the, acting chief of police, who's, in his stead right now. And we have a number of police officers that are in the church and folks in law enforcement. 60% of our congregation are active retired military.
Wow.
So, these are real issues for us here. um, and I would say, in terms of like summary, I think we have deep brokenness. There is racism, prejudice, bias, um, that are present in the world, and they're also present in the church because people are present in the church. And in all 7 churches that I've served over 27 years, I've seen prejudice, bias, racism, and I've confronted it where I've seen it, um, and I talked about it, and I've sought to address it. But this is it's the product of sin,
Hmm.
and so I think it's important that as Christians that we are honest about the fact that we're sinful, and we're honest about the fact that at best we're saved sinners or we're sinners being saved, I mean, so that's where we are. So I thought it was important for us as a church to talk about it. It also was a point of division for us, particularly in 2008 for Potomac Valley. And so, from a strategic standpoint, we decided, both myself and the elders, that we would engage the issue directly because, we believe that the best defense is a strong offense. So
Okay,
we're
so
like,
you've mentioned that twice now. 2008, the election of President Obama to his first term.
mhm.
How did that? Can you just quickly summarize, like, why did that cause a division in the church?
Because there were some Christians that really believed that voting for President Obama was a violation of faith and was just morally repugnant and wrong. And there were other Christians who felt like voting for President Obama was an affirmation of their faith and was parties, but I think they're no different than
Okay, I lost you there. There's about a 10-second
whoever.
gap there.
Okay.
Some of the Christians felt that it was an affirmation of their faith.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Some of the Christians felt like it was an affirmation of their faith, um, and that it was the right thing to do to vote for President Obama. So we had Christians on both sides of the issue. The Christians that were in opposition to voting for President Obama did not necessarily understand the racial overtones or undertones of what they were communicating to their brothers and sisters.
So
And
they
there were
so they were saying it's just kind of a platform issue, not a race issue.
right,
But then other people are saying you're just saying that's because he's black.
right.
Okay.
And so it hit square. I mean, because what was going on in the world definitely hit us squarely as a church. Now, I wasn't here at that time. I only
Hmm.
heard the stories
Got it.
of kind of how that went on from both parties, if you will. I will say that as a church, we've made a commitment to having an open posture, and we define that as having a cruciformed posture. We extend our hands to the right as much as we do to the left, and so we're a church for all people,
Mm-hmm.
um, and and so that episode I think really informed my thinking because when I came in and I interviewed in 2014, the minister that was here, we're talking, and he's like, race and politics really divides this group. They're amazing, but they get divided easily. And so we did a lot of teaching about reconciliation, about unity, about the fact that we have to respect differences. And I'll tell you, I even with this upcoming election, I think it's perfectly fine for people to vote for whoever they want to vote for. But I think as Christians, we have to recognize that number one, we have to respect differences, and number two, that this really is a debatable issue. It's a choice, and
Mm-hmm.
that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But we're called to be ambassadors of Christ, and so demonizing people or deifying people is not consistent with the pattern of Jesus, and the call. So I don't think anybody's going to save us other than Jesus, and I don't think anyone's the antichrist. Though some people do things that are anti-Christian,
Mm-hmm.
but my goal is to persuade them because from my vantage point, they live 20 miles up the street. Their mission, like I have to be able to have them come to church.
Right.
Like my goal is to help every elected official to come to faith in Jesus. So it doesn't make any sense for me to take a posture that is antagonistic. But it does make sense for me to take a posture that is clear, that is firm, that is authentically Christian.
Okay.
And
Let me
and
just stop you right there and ask you a question. We've got people in our own church that won't talk to other people in the church because of their political views. They just feel like, I can't talk to that person. And the word demonizing, the idea that, hey, that viewpoint is evil. How can you be a Christian and be this party member, Democrat or Republican? Tell me how you deal with sticky situations like that.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I was in one of them last week. I'll probably be in one of them this week. I think you just got to have honest conversations and bring people back to the scriptures. And I think you have to be consistent in the messaging. This is also a part of people are informed with negative thinking based on consistent messaging.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, in the same way, I'm like, okay, point taken. I'm going to do consistent messaging on the other side. Like, I'm going to stay. So if you were to track every sermon that we've done in the past 2 years, which I know you won't do, and please don't do that. But if you were, you would probably hear almost every sermon. We don't demonize, we don't deify. We don't demonize, we don't deify. We are a church for all people. Cruciform posture. We love everybody. Remember that we've got to reach all of them.
Right.
But we send the message consistently, and then we address the issues directly. And one of the commitments that our core leadership group has made is that we're going to talk through the issues and deal with them and ensure that there are no gaps between us. And then that there are no gaps then between the family group leaders. It's hard. And right now it's especially hard because, on social media, we've got good friends, great disciples that are struggling in their faith, that are saying disparaging things on both sides. Right. And we're consistently trying to help them to see you cannot do that and be an ambassador of Christ, because you don't speak for yourself anymore.
Right.
You speak for another country. So you've got to figure what's the message that Jesus gave you. You give that message. If you want to have a private opinion, solid, that's great. But you've got to give the message that you've been given to give. Yeah. So that's where we are. I do want to share one quick thing though, Rob.
Sure.
Which is just one of the most encouraging stories that was so weird for me. So a good friend of mine, family decided to become a part of Potomac Valley. And this person was an elected official, and they posted something very disparaging against another recently elected official. So a Democrat posted something negative about a Republican. And so I got a phone call from another former elected official saying, "What are you going to do about it?" And I'm like, what am I going to do about it? I don't know. And the post turned into a news article in our local news and just got really ugly. And involving, racial, racially tinged language. I'm trying to sanitize it the best I can.
Right.
But long story short, the person that made the post that was offensive called the person who was offended and apologized.
Wow.
And then, I said, we have an opportunity here to really testify to God. Let's all get on a Zoom call. So 2 Republican officials, a Democratic official, and myself, the 4 of us got on a phone call and had a conversation. There were tears, there was forgiveness, there was reconciliation. Everybody, was reconciled by the end of the conversation. I think there is a power to calling people to righteousness, and again, doesn't say anything other than the power of God, because the basis for our conversation were all of those people identified as people of faith. Only one of the people on the call, identified as being a part of our congregation, but then another person this week reached out and said, "Hey, I think we'd like to be a part of a small group." So I think if the Christians could understand, and I would advocate this more than anything else, that after this election, we still have to win the world. So before the election, we've got to be the peacemakers that are there to help pick up the pieces. So if we change our posture, like, this is actually an amazing harvest. All these people are angry. They're going to all need to reconcile. I need to be somebody that can bring people together. as opposed to someone who tears people apart. And I can have my strongly held views
Hmm.
while still being someone who reconciles people. And I personally have very strong views where I disagree with the Democratic Party and I disagree with the Republican Party. But for me, all the parties are souls that need to be saved. And so I try to keep it kind of within that frame. But it's that to me, I honestly didn't know how that conversation was going to go.
Oh
I
my
didn't know if it
gosh.
was going to get ugly, but it didn't. People sometimes surprise you and they reconcile and they forgive, you know, and they could not be more stridently, in their position, but they're able to come together.
Right. Well, I can't imagine just a more volatile and just a hotter flashpoint than where you're at, right there, within miles of the seat of power. Must be crazy. I don't envy your situation there,
I
but
hear you, bro.
I do think you are the perfect person for it, all things considered. Now let's kind of narrow the focus a little bit to the ICOC itself, our family of churches. The ICOC has prided itself on its racial diversity, going back to the Crossroads campus ministry movement, the 60s, the inclusion of blacks and whites in worship together, where before you had a black church, you had white churches. They would have coffee every once in a while, but essentially there was no real communication. How do you view the state of racial diversity inside the ICOC these days?
I think we're at a very tenuous point. I think in a lot of ways we're at a crossroads. Is my
Pardon,
personal view.
pardon the pun. Yeah, there you go.
Yes, yes, exactly. We are back at the crossroads. I think we're there. We're back there, and I think it's a generational shift. I think a lot of the leaders that champion that change are retiring. Sadly, some of them have gone on to be with the Lord, um, and that's why I really commend what you're doing and have been doing for a long time. Um, I think we're at a crossroads. Here's the thing: 96% of all Black people go to all Black churches, and 99% of all white people go to all white churches.
Wow.
So we are either in the 1% or the 4%. We are a minority group within, American Christianity, if you will, in terms of the fact that we have a diverse congregation or have diverse congregations. Um, but one of the challenges is it's really hard to go from good to great. It just is, because once you have diversity, you can easily overlook inequity.
Mhm.
You can easily overlook the fact that we may have diversity in the congregation, but we don't have diversity in the leadership. Or we may have diversity in the leadership in terms of racial diversity, but we don't have generational diversity or diversity of thinking.
Mm.
And to reach the world as it is, specifically to reach North America as it is, I think we need to make a pretty radical shift, and really recognize the real, like seismic changes that are happening. Um, uh, you know, those that are not in the faith community, the the spiritual non-religious group in our world and in our country, they're growing at astronomical rates. Um, I have no contention with the Muslim community,
Okay,
except
so which group are you referring to?
I'm I'm referring to not non those who don't identify, the unchurched, who
Okay.
don't identify as Christian.
Okay.
That group is growing, and
Mhm.
the ideas that they're purporting are growing.
Mhm.
Um, the Muslim community is growing in a significant way. And again, I don't have any issues with the Muslim community except their view on Jesus. This is my only contention.
Mhm.
I love Muslim people. I love Arabic food. I love or all the food that represents all different Muslim people. But what I believe about Jesus, this is our sticking point.
Mhm.
Um, but they're growing, and so I think in the ICOC in particular, we have to recognize that we've gone through a decade of decline, and I don't think anybody's been really owning that the way we need to own it. When you're at 1 or 2% growth, any church leader that's worth their salt can tell you that you're actually going backwards.
Right.
You don't, when you're at 1 or 2%, you're not really registering where people really are.
Right.
Um, and so if you, you know, kick the tires and open the crack the hood open, you're going to see there's a lot of issues there. So how do we make the shift, and how does that relate to diversity? I think we should celebrate that we have diversity, but we shouldn't rest on our laurels about it. I think we should recognize that we really have to engage a robust conversation about equity, and and regain, if you will, or maybe gain for the first time, a sense of desperation about our need for God to lead us as it relates to issues of equity. Because the world dominates this conversation,
Right.
and it shouldn't, because it doesn't have any answers.
Hmm.
Like I personally, I have no problem with peaceful protests. I've been on a peaceful protest. I absolutely find rioting and violence abhorrent and wrong, no question. But those protests are mostly led by people that don't have the faith that is necessary to reconcile the communities that they're calling for change in. So people will, it only serves to entrench their views and their tensions with each other. Who can bring people together? Christians can. Who has a diverse community that could welcome people? Many of our churches do. Who's sleeping on the watch right now? Most of our churches are, and so I think we've got to step up our game, and it's not about racial tension. Racial tension is it's the fruit, but the root is sin and brokenness, and the solution is the church. It always has been. So I think my prayer for the ICOC in particular is that we not congratulate ourselves anymore about our
Hmm.
diversity.
Hmm.
We actually utilize it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It is our great. It is such a testament. Like as I said, we're in this super diverse area, right? Most churches in this area are not diverse.
Hmm.
So when I talk to a elected official or a community leader, and when I invite the chief of police in, I was blown away by his response. This, Chief Bernard, he's served as our chief for 30 years. He's been to every church. He knows everybody. He came to church with us. We're honoring the police back in September, last September, a year ago. And Chief Bernard was like almost in tears. He's like, I've never seen a group this diverse. I've never seen this many young people. And Chief Bernard and I, from that day, we were like, thick as thieves.
That's
And
amazing.
so I think we have that in every city where we have
Hmm.
a church of believers. I think we should lean into that.
Right. That's
But
awesome.
that's my viewpoint.
Right. And I love the way you're thinking. One of the things that struck me is that in the 60s there was a spiritual voice in the wilderness. There was a religious foundation upon which the fight for civil rights was resting upon. You had
Yes.
the Southern Baptist Convention. You had,
Mhm.
of course, Martin Luther King Jr. And I've thought we need a spiritual voice, and that's kind of what I'm hearing you say is that okay, yes, we've made great progress, granted, but let's take that strength and use it to advance things farther and be that voice.
Yes, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I think so many of the solutions that are coming forward are solutions without God.
Right.
And this is where humanity goes when it's in desperation. It makes these choices that are so destructive, and we do need to be the spiritual leaders in our community. One of the things I think we struggle with, Rob, is this idea that we have of separation of church and state, non-involvement in civilian affairs, um, and we shouldn't get involved in these issues because they're political issues.
Right.
But everything has a politic. My politic just happens to be that Jesus is Lord. That's what are the power? relationships in my life. Jesus is Lord. That's my politics, and so I have to be involved in the community. And that's the thing that just struck me, like Square's Day when I went to Indonesia. It's like these guys are not divorced from their society. They are
Mm-hmm.
engaged in it.
Mm-hmm.
They just choose not to engage in it in a non-Christian way.
Right.
They choose to engage in it as Christians.
Yeah.
And we really struggle, Rob, because we don't want to get involved in civilian affairs, and we shouldn't get involved in civilian affairs. We should get involved in spiritual affairs. Spiritual affairs involves being involved in the community, and
Yeah.
that's what Jesus did. He was there, in the middle of it. One could argue, and I would argue, that the triumphant entry was itself a protest march.
Mm.
I mean, he was standing up against the system of the temple, but it wasn't about politics. It was about people. And I think that's the part where I think we should not cede the big ideas and the big opportunities of the day
Mm-hmm.
to the world. We should be willing to get involved in the mess without becoming like the world.
Right.
And I could be totally wrong about that. You can help me out with that.
Well,
I'm
as
willing
you're
to make.
as you're talking, I'm thinking about the letter from Birmingham jail. Just talking really very similar theme. Just like trying to get, in particular at that time, white Christians involved in the issues that we're facing at that time. But it's probably a larger discussion than we've got time for here. But
Yeah.
I love the way you're thinking, and I like your approach, and I totally agree with you that there needs to be a spiritual voice that guides things towards some type of a reconciliation rather than just tearing things down, and on both sides. How do you deal with the tension between races and ethnic backgrounds within the church? So you've got like 30 or 40% Black, 30% white, and then 30% other, Asian, different backgrounds, Hispanic. And your own experience as an African American, I think this is where it's really tricky as a church leader today. Like, for instance, after the George Floyd shooting and in the wake of that, there was a drive like, hey, we got to address this as a church for sure. But me as a white leader trying to speak, it was tough. Like I formulated a letter trying to address it in a spiritual way. I turned it into my core group of leaders, and it's a mixed group of African Americans. We've got a couple Asians, Hispanics. And basically they kicked it back to me and say, hey, that's not what I think. I mean, they all had their own opinions on it. It's like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble here. It just kind of brought up all of a sudden, my view is not everyone's view here. And, we eventually came to kind of a way to move forward, but it's challenging when you're of one particular race, because it's like, hey, I'm sure for you, hey, Will, you got to stand on the side of African Americans, and what do you think about this? And, how do you deal with that tension?
Yeah, I will tell you, bro, it's been a struggle, for sure. And I think race is one factor, generations another. Different generations communicate about issues in very different ways. And some people don't like talking about stuff. They're just like, we just don't. It's church. Don't talk about it at church.
Mm-hmm.
Other people like, it's church. This is the only place I can talk about it.
Right.
So there's that. It's been a struggle. I think, like you, I've really leaned on our core leadership group as a group that I can talk to, so I can hear different voices. I've had to embrace that with almost any choice that I make to address these issues, I am going to invariably not have agreement from everyone. And my goal is not to, polarize a situation or demonize anything or vilify anyone, but just to address it. It's been challenging, though. I mean, it really has.
Have you ever thought that my church may split over this issue?
Oh, absolutely, because I know that our church almost did. So I've thought that that's possible. I've prayed that the work that we've done and the example that we've tried to set as a leadership would carry the day. And I'm personally confident that it will. Um, but I've worried. I mean, I've felt split in myself over
Mm-hmm.
these issues. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I have a 17-year-old young man who's African American, who's a runner. And so when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, that hit me squarely. I'm 45 and George Floyd was 46. I mean, um, so those things hit me. The thing that I've tried to do, um, is always to be a voice of reconciliation and engagement, and also a voice that doesn't represent myself. Like I'm not here to represent the African American view, though I can tell you my view as an African American,
Mm-hmm.
or the white view or the Latino view. My call is to be ambassador of Christ. How do I bring all of God's children together
Mm.
and do it in a way that speaks with authenticity and integrity, and necessary alarm, when needed. That's a struggle.
Mm.
I mean, as we've addressed the issues, I mean, I've had, you know, some of my white brothers and sisters feel like, man, the way that you said that just didn't register right, and I've had some of my black brothers and sisters that have felt like you weren't hard enough on that issue, or you
Mm-hmm.
didn't say that quite right. So you're right. I mean, I know the young people in particular have been the most vocal, which I'm really proud of them for telling me what they really think. Um, but yeah, again, I'm not here to represent. I'm not a politician, so I'm not here to represent the view of the demo.
Right.
I'm here to represent Jesus.
Right.
I'm an ambassador in a theocracy.
It's a
So
very uncomfortable situation because, I've always taken pride. We used to lead an international ministry in Tokyo, Japan, which is people from all nations. So I've never, ever thought, oh, I'm racist or anything like that. And yet I get kickback from my own kids when I say something in a certain way, and it's like, they'll correct me. And I'm like, oh my
what in the
gosh,
world?
I've got the police right here in my own home, and it's an uncomfortable time, definitely, where it's like everyone's having to look at attitudes and views. I don't want to take up all your time, Hill. This has been an amazing time, but what one thing would help leaders? Let's imagine you're leading a small church in, let's say, I don't know, let's say Nebraska or somewhere like that. And how do you navigate this current time? Like, any practicals, what takeaways, just to try to keep your church together, be godly at the same time? Any thoughts?
Yeah. Remember who you are. Remember that you're a disciple of Jesus. Um, Engage in the local community. There's such a void of leadership in the local community. Get engaged and show the Christians how you care about people. Um, Everyone's not going to agree about these issues, and that's okay. But I think it's important as a church leader that you really model a commitment to loving all people in practical terms, owning responsibility for, if you say something the wrong way, apologize, reconcile. But I think more than anything else, I'd say engage in the local community. Don't underestimate the power of how many people that are not yet Christians are watching what you do. And those people, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, if God gives us that time, I believe will come to faith in Jesus because they saw how you loved people in practical terms. Pray for the community in private. If you have opportunities, pray for the community in public. Serve the community in private. If you have opportunities, serve it in the public square. I think I would encourage leaders in Nebraska, in Idaho, in Illinois, where I'm from, or whether you find yourself on either coast or in the South, wherever you are, get engaged.
Mm-hmm.
We could not be more needed than at this time,
Right.
to be visible and engaged. And I believe that the greatest harvest is in front of us.
Wow, that's awesome. I know you're getting your doctorate right now. I could, just by listening to your comments, I go, this guy's got a book. He's got a book bubbling up. Are you working on a book right now? Are you got something going?
I've been working on something for a little while.
Mhm.
I need to put stuff down on paper
Mhm.
in a much more intentional way.
I mean, boy, I could just, you definitely need to put those thoughts on paper. There's a lot of great thinking and stuff that could very, very help. Just from your background, your family background, and all your experiences. Um, if you can put it together in writing, be awesome. Just I would be the first one to buy your book.
Thanks, bro. That's so encouraging.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, what advice would you give a person who wanted to make this life count for God? You are making a difference right now and continue to do so. And I look forward to watching your career over the next 20 years or so. What would you advise for someone who's young? They go, man, I want to do that. I want to do something like that where I'm doing something significant for God.
Yeah, I think, for someone who's young trying to make sense of where to go, we're living in history right now. I mean, so, and one of the temptations when you're living in transformative times is to be spread all over the place. I think my encouragement would be to really get anchored in a relationship and in a community where you can really get the support that you need, where you can really grow in your faith, you can get practical discipling on your life. Take the time. Jesus didn't start till he was 30 for a reason.
Mhm.
Like, take the time to figure out your faith, to walk with God in silence, to have people that are in your life that can help you. And think about the long game. Like, if you're in your 20s, dream of where you'll be at 40 and 50. If you're in your 30s, the same way. I would think about the long game. And I think the thing that I found to be the most significant is being alone with God and having people that really care about you, where you have a high degree of trust, who can really help you to work through the deep issues in your heart. Definitely be engaged in the community, but there's a danger when you're young and doing lots of busy work, and being everywhere but
Right.
being nowhere. So
Right.
I'd get rooted, get really rooted, and learn from people who have walked some of that road. Discipling is the thing that I think is one of the it's often missed,
Mhm.
the value of just having people in your life.
Absolutely. Great advice. Great advice. Well, with this is, I just got to ask this question. Okay. This is
Mhm.
totally off topic. Okay. Not in the script or anything like that, but just was watching the news. Steve Nash just got hired as the head coach for the Brooklyn Nets. Were you aware of that?
Mhm. I wasn't aware of that. So that's amazing, by the way. Yes.
Okay. Is it Stephen A. Brown, the sports commentator? Is that his name? Stephen?
I believe so.
Anyway, he made a comment and he said, "Hey, Steve Nash is amazing, super gifted, awesome guy. Has no coaching talent. No coaching experience. You've got people like Tyronn Lue and other black coaches that are still assisting coaches. This is an example of white privilege."
Mhm.
Now, I just thought that I just got to ask you that, and this does not have to be included in the recording, but I just want to hear what you think about that, because that's a real hot topic, especially for white people. It's like, oh my gosh, and then it's like, okay, this really brings to the fore in a real live situation.
Mhm.
Okay, what are your thoughts on this, on
Yeah.
example like that?
So white privilege is definitely a hot topic. You're absolutely right. And in our church, there are people that have very, very strong views, as you can imagine, on both sides of the conversation about white privilege. My understanding of white privilege is that it doesn't mean for one second that someone hasn't worked hard or hasn't accomplished what they've accomplished through hard work, or that they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. It just means that the color of their skin is just one thing that has not held them back, and that the privilege in America of being white is that if you're white, that's just one less thing that holds you back.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a black kid and a white kid, that do the exact same job the exact same way, the 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 advantage that the white kid would have is that your color is not going to be a deterrent. to what you're able to do. Um, there are an incredible amount of people that are Black and Latino and Asian that have done incredible things and are very successful. And the same thing with white people. Um, I look at this, like most people do, from the lens of my own family. So I'm the oldest of my mom's children, and my brother, who's white, is the youngest. Um, there have been challenges that I've had that he's not had. I don't begrudge him for that. I'm happy that he doesn't have those challenges. I wouldn't want him to have the nervousness that I felt when the blue lights were on, even though I'm friends with the chief of police. You know, I wouldn't want him to have the barriers that I've had to overcome. I'm actually happy that he doesn't.
Right.
But it would be difficult for me if he could not understand the fact that I go through those challenges. And if
Right.
I told him, hey, it was a rough day because I had to deal with this, if he was like, no, that's just in your mind, it's just your feelings, that'll be difficult on a relational level. And so I think that the key to addressing issues like white privilege is honest conversations and empathy.
Mm.
Um, is was that choice a product of white privilege? I don't entirely know. It, I don't. I mean, I don't know that that's entirely knowable for me. The people that were in the middle of making that choice, they're the ones that I think have to ask themselves those questions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, are there Black coaches that get overlooked? And white coaches that are favored? Sure, that happens. I mean, it's the world. People can be drawn to people that look like them or that they identify with their story
Right.
in ways that are unconscious, and they can be drawn in ways that are conscious.
Right.
Um, and so I am a person who I do believe that white privilege is real, because I believe that many privileges are real. I mean, as a man, there are things that I don't struggle with, that my wife has had to struggle with, and when she tells me, I've learned by making the bad choice not to dismiss it like, oh no, you're just feeling that, like, no, it's a real thing for you. I've messed up, and so but I don't think that privilege is the biggest uh, obstacle that we have. I think the biggest obstacle that we have is empathy.
Mm.
Because if someone says that they feel like they weren't treated equally, then I think hear them,
Mm.
and understand why, and don't be too quick to dismiss them.
Right.
Um, and also, I have, from having lots of conversations, fortunately or unfortunately, with white brothers and sisters, I understand how folks could feel like their life experience and hard work has been diminished by the fact that the color of their skin, something they did not do, and they feel vilified or disrespected, or what do you mean? I think even in that conversation, you're beginning to understand,
Right.
like, how someone who's non-white would feel about. So the outrage that is felt, that's the thing you want to hold on to right there.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what people feel like.
Mm.
I've done everything the right way, but this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the tension point around privilege, I think, gives an opportunity for relationship and for dialogue.
Right.
Um, Again, I of recently I've not used the term white privilege much, and honestly, I didn't use it. I never used it in the past, but just because I know that it can be such a tension point for
Right.
people.
Right.
But I definitely, Rob, I definitely believe it is real, but I don't think it's the only privilege that exists. And so, um, and I don't know that the answer is um, found in even some of the language that we're using. I think the answer is found in empathy,
Mm.
in respect,
Mm.
um, and for what it's worth, I mean, I have had experiences within our family of churches where I have been overlooked or treated disrespectfully. And when I gave it time enough to work through the issues with the people, it was on the basis of race. So I've experienced that.
That was
That
one of my questions I was going to add on. Have you ever experienced that before, where you got
yeah,
passed over for a job or a position because of that?
absolutely. I mean, and absolutely yes, within our family of churches, which is a truth that I think I've had to own, and I've had the conversations with the folks that have said to me point blank, Will, there's no way that a Black person could lead a racially diverse congregation. And I'm like, that's wrong, or I can't picture you as the church leader because you're Black. My picture of a church leader is white. Um, and again, you can go a lot of different places with that. And I've gone a lot of different places with that. It's not always been good and like, in terms of my heart. But what I know to be true is that goodness is not the product of how someone looks. It's the product of what someone does.
Hmm.
So there are good and bad people from with all skin colors. And truthfully, all people are no one's good except God alone. So
Mm-hmm.
that's not the deal. Um, but how you overcome that, I think it's through having real conversations, forgiveness, reconciliation, empathy, but also through example. You know, I mean, I think it's important that as a white leader, as a Black leader, as an Asian leader, Latino leader, that we treat all people with fairness and with respect
Right.
as much as we can.
Right.
And where we fall short, look, I'm the first to tell you, I mess up. And so it's been challenging though, bro. I'll be
Yeah.
honest with you. I've not had a more difficult time in the ministry than the past 6 months. But I've also not had a more transformative time.
Mm.
So I'm very hopeful
Mm.
um, about the future.
Do you ever
Because
fear for your family or for yourself?
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, and I live in a really safe neighborhood.
Right.
But I mean, when everything went down, I mean, we're in Virginia, so like Arizona, we got lots of guns, you know. And, we all got lots of guns, and I don't have a problem with guns. I don't
Mhm.
own a gun, but my grandfather was a
Right.
cop, so I don't have a problem with guns. But my first response when it all happened is I went to Gander and I was like, let me go look at some guns, man.
Right.
Like
Right.
I got to keep my family safe. Um, but the truth is, that's not the that's not the solution. And again, there are some people that do feel the need to have guns to keep their home safe, and I respect that choice. But I've definitely felt fear for my family, and I
Especially
felt
especially because you are a public figure, you're in front of crowds, you're speaking up, you're saying things that may offend either side of the argument, black or
yeah,
white. And
yeah,
so
bro. No, it's funny. We had I pray, prior to the pandemic, we would pray every month or sometimes 2 times a month for the local council meetings. And so I went to go pray like I normally pray. And that day, we're having a Second Amendment conversation. So the hall was filled. I mean, and the everywhere, there literally was hundreds of people. And you're right, bro. I mean, I had a guy that was right up on me, and I could feel what he had on him.
oh my
you know,
gosh.
and I was like, all right, like this is real. Uh, but my job today, as it is every day, is I'm here to pray,
Yeah.
and again, I, you know, I do believe that God is in control.
Mhm.
Um, but I struggle like everybody else does, with wanting my family to be safe and feeling concerned about what's going on. But I am, as you are, resolute in my belief that the solution is Jesus.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Will, for the time. And I, just as we talk, there's so many other things. And I'm sure for listeners are like, oh, ask him about this, ask him about that. And I know that you're doing so many videos and you have your own podcast. I think it's called Greater Everyday Podcast. And so people can listen to you there. But thank you for making the time and for just the great example in the ministry that you're doing. That's first and foremost what I was interested in, is finding out what in the world are you doing there that's helping that church that was struggling and now it's growing in a situation that's, facing directly right in the storm of all the cultural events that are happening across the country, right there in the fringes of the DC area. So thank you for your time.
Brother, thank you. Thank you for your example and for what you're doing. And I'm grateful to be on the podcast. And
thank you. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. It's great to have you here listening from around the world, whether you're in India today or in Japan or in Korea or any country. I'd like to ask you, please subscribe to the program. Let your friends and family know. You can also email me with feedback or questions. I'd love to hear from you. rob@tucsonchurchofchrist.org. My goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.